Welcome to ESG In Practice, where we turn environmental, social, and governance topics into practical, actionable steps.
I'm Ann, your guide to data-driven sustainability insights.
And I'm Abby, with 2 decades of hands-on experience in this field.
Together with our guests, we're unraveling the complexities of ESG, where we move the discussion away from glossary reporting
to make sustainability and compliance a real competitive advantage for your business.
Welcome to another episode of ESG In Practice. We're here today with our new guest, Lars Erik Lund. Hello, Lars. How are you doing?
How are you doing? I'm fine.
Can you give us a bit of introduction about yourself, your background, and also the company that you work for, Veidekke?
My name is Lars Erik Lund. I'm 55 years old. Privately, I have 3 kids, a dog and a cat, and I live just around Oslo. I'm Executive Vice President of Strategy and Sustainability in a company called Veidekke. Veidekke is a Scandinavian construction and engineering company. We construct roads, drive tunnels, bridges, buildings, for anything like an office building or apartments. We do that in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. We're largest in Norway because we were established here in 1936. We still have a sizable presence in Sweden and Norway as well. We're about 8,500 people, half and half of office workers like me, and then the rest is out on the project like carpenters or woodworkers or concrete.
We're really excited to have you on this episode to also talk about the S within E, S, and G. We've had a lot of guests talking about E, carbon reporting, how do they manage their carbon emissions. We've had a lot of compliance officers talk about the G in terms of how they handle the anti-bribery and corruption. But we haven't had so many guests focusing on the S part, the social part of ESG. How do you define S, and what are you doing and working in this area?
We all probably define it differently, but I think one of the things that attracted me to the S of ESG is we're a company with a lot of people working there. So it's the human aspect of everything. The impact we have on our employees and the risk they're taking every day, as well as the impact we have on society and the social part of that, the human part of that. Our social sustainability, or the S in our ESG, is very much based on how we treat our employees and all the suppliers that are in our work sites.
Yeah, I really like the S because I think it's often overlooked. And S is all about people. So it's your employees, your customers, your supply chain. How do you ensure that they have a safe working environment? How do you ensure that there's a diverse working environment? A good social program to ensure that everybody is included. I know Veidekke is working on several programs, but I'd love for you to highlight 1 to 3 interesting ones that you're working on.
We have several programs just to lift some of the issues that we're interested in right now. One of the things that we're enthusiastically interested in is what we call the part where we see that people are not in the workforce today. We have a lot of people in Norway that are not actively engaging in the workforce, so we want to bring people into the work siting and then give them an opportunity they wouldn't have elsewhere. As a construction company, we have some kind of academics or office workers and engineers, but we have a set of people that works on site. It's a low-level part. It's not low-level in the idea that's not knowledgeable, but there's an opportunity to get into that workforce without like a university degree. One of the programs that we run is called in Norwegian Skole på byggeplass, which is school on a building construction site, where we give people that have fallen out of the school system an opportunity to get back and learn a trade. We've done this since the 90s. At first, it was a program in Akershus municipality. Now it's expanded into Oslo, and we truly want this to be something that we can do all over Norway as well as in Scandinavia. Until now, there's probably 200 people that's gained a letter of trade and are able to actually work either in Veidekke or any other construction company.
I think that's really important also as a foreigner that's moved to a new country. Oftentimes you need a first step in, that first experience, and then opens the door for everything else. So I think that's really great.
That's one of the programs. It's an autonomous organization. There's different result units or business units in the organization able to actually grab hold of some of the parts of our material analysis. They get into that and say, oh, this is something I think we can do something about. And in Trondheim, they've expanded that into talking about and engaging the community to get more people on board. It's the same idea of reducing the unemployment and getting people to start working in construction. The Fountain House, which is an international organization, we have an agreement and a cooperation with them where we get them to have people working at our construction site part-time. That's a ramp to the work site. And the last part is that I think Veidekke is probably known in Norway at least for having a long tenure. A lot of people work in Veidekke longer than the regular or average length of working. We're very keen on having that experience and the knowledge that they bring working as long as they can and they feel it's an opportunity to do with the flexibility that you need when you get older. That's 3 of them.
Yeah, very interesting. What is maybe a bit different about this podcast and the others is that for you to conduct your business, you need people, right? And that's why you have a lot of programs, I assume. And there's a keyword that I heard earlier. You mentioned material analysis, where you can have impact through your business. Can you maybe explain to us a bit, how did you come to realize what kind of impact you can have the most that pushed you towards these programs?
None of these are based on the fact that we did a sustainability, like a double materiality analysis. They're not like, oh, I find an IRO, I'm going to go for that. I think Veidekke all the time since 1936 has been very interested in treating people. It's a part of the culture already. When you look at it that way, you understand that we have a positive impact. A lot of the sustainability issues that we talk about the negative impact you have, like the footprint that you can do. You have a big footprint with regards to concrete, or a big footprint with regards to corruption and other kind of G issues. But the S issues is that we have a positive impact. We tend to forget, and we tend to think that business is like this closed door and everything that happens on the outside doesn't actually affect us. And I think that we have always thought of Veidekke as something bigger than just a company. So we see that we have an effect on the outside world, and we want to reduce, I think in Norwegian we call it utenforskap, the people actually not getting access to the worksite. You want to bring them into the worksite because I think we have an impact there. That's part of the materiality analysis, that we understand what sort of impact we have. That means what sort of positive impact we have on the world.
I really like that good way of looking at S, because oftentimes, like you said, E and G is about mitigating the impact, about reducing the impact, but about S, even making a greater impact with the resources and the people and the customers and everybody that you're working with. You could make it bigger and have a more positive impact. So it's a nice dichotomy between the three of them.
Yeah, but it's not usually so common that companies are so proactive in their initiatives to include and create an inclusive environment. So I think that's very good what you're doing there. But is it always been part of the company identity, or has it grown into the strategy over the years?
The human part of the company has always been there. Let me take one personal example. I've gotten to be known as one of the EVPs that struggle with depression, right? One of the companies that is able to actually do something about it is Veidekke. My opportunity to actually talk about mental health issues in the workplace has also made us able to mitigate some of the negative consequences of work. Because one of the negative consequences of work is that we are burned out or overworked or overstressed. And the ability to actually talk about mental health issues, which is my personal journey, and then talk about how we can actually create brain-friendly workplaces where we accept and include people, which is also a part of this, right? The diversity issue, where we have a long way to go in the construction industry, where today I think we have 12% women, there's a long way to go. We need to start the job somewhere and start talking about inclusion and start talking. So that's the part of the negative impact that we can do something about. I think Veidekke is a culture of being able to do something about it all the time.
I think it's also really interesting too, because I think you are known in Norway for speaking up about mental health, and then also being in such a high position in an EVP level of a large corporation, and being willing to speak up opens the door and makes other people feel comfortable about that. But what made you feel that you can speak up and also not worry about it affecting Veidekke or the reputation of the company? It'd be great to get some examples for maybe other people who might be struggling in other corporations that can't feel that they can speak up openly and honestly.
I talked about this not in a podcast, but in a debate. Why would you think it's important that people are able to talk about being bipolar or having depression or struggling with anxiety? I think I said something in the line of, do you think that the bipolar disorder will go away if you don't talk about it? Employees actually struggling with bipolar disorder or anything else, ADHD, or they struggle with it. It doesn't help trying to keep it a secret. Instead, I think being open about this is part of life. Most people struggle with some part of their mental health during a lifetime. To be able to actually talk about it makes it a room where we can start building good mental health from work sites instead of the other side, which is overwork or overstressed or burnt out.
Very unique perspective, I think.
I think it's strange that you think it's a unique perspective, but I understand what you're saying. I think media and everyone else has talked about, if you struggle with this, you're like crazy. How can you work something which is crazy? But these are normal incidents of neurodiversity or mental health disorders that should be normalized.
What I meant by unique perspective, I meant my unique position maybe, where you are in such a high level and have the comfort to speak about this, because I think it really goes back to the core of the company values. But sometimes companies are so business driven, so profit driven, that this gets put in the back. And this is where the social initiatives, I hope, will allow companies to make improvement. And that's why I'm asking you about tips on how companies can facilitate such processes in their business.
This is the cool part. There's ample research on the diversity issue. If we talk about diversity, we've seen McKinsey reports talking about diversity will create profit. I think that's been debunked. I think some of the research coming out now states that it doesn't. Addition, it doesn't kind of create less profitability. It's just not a part of that discussion. Talking about diversity as something that I would call a moral imperative instead of a hypothetical imperative, I think is important. This goes back to being able to discuss these things without talking about them as a business case all the time. Because if we talk about things as a business case, we will always get that IRR discussion. Okay, hiring more women, what's the IRR of doing that? Or hiring more neurodiverse people, what's the IRR of doing that? That's the wrong perspective to take. I'm trained financially. I have that background. I want to make money. It's not about that. I don't think hiring more diverse people is to the detriment of profit, but I don't even think about it as a reason to get more profitable. If we were to talk about this being a normal part of life, there's 50% women in the world and 50% men. We are different. Per definition, we're different. So how about just say that we're different and accept that it's part of life to be different?
And that companies should represent the differences.
Companies should struggle to be inclusive rather than actually struggle to be diverse. You need to start talking about being inclusive. Let me give you an example. If we were the 60s, nurses were all dressed in uniforms. If I were to say that we need to have 20% men in this group, until we're 10%, you have to use nurse uniform. We wouldn't get people in, right? Men wouldn't be searching for positions within that profession. This is the same today. I think we need to start talking about what are the barriers for underrepresented group to work here? What are the barriers for women to work in construction? It might be easy things like having proper wardrobe facilities so that you can actually change without doing it beside men. It could be we need to have protective gear that are designed to women, not to men. So that's the part where I think we need to start looking at what are the barriers to actually get people included. And that's the culture we need to talk about.
I like that because I often see job advertisements or talk to people who are trying to recruit and there's like, well, there's not enough women that apply. And then it's like, okay, but what are the barriers? Why are women not applying? Is there something in your application? I think that next step is not, it's like, well, we've tried. Nobody came, but that reducing the barriers, I like that aspect of it. It's a good point.
I don't have as much experience as the two of you, but where do you begin to identify the barriers? In your case, you mentioned a couple examples like protective gear, but with so much data around, have you been able to utilize it in some kind of way to help you with identifying such barriers, or maybe not?
Or even how to collect the data. Yeah. There's so many social programs probably going around your company. How do you even know about them or even find the information behind it?
This is longer than just saying that flip a button and they get results. You need to flip a button and then see the results going over time. It's like my son says when we do kind of frisbee golf, he says that trust the process. When I throw, don't look at the frisbee. This goes with the same. You need to trust the process. If you think that inclusion will drive diversity, just do the inclusion part. Do the inclusion part means that we need to think of, is there anywhere in how we actually treat other people that is not inclusive? Let's say we do a meeting and we talk about things that we need to decide. I said, well, this is the thing I wanted to have decided. And what do you think? And then you say, well, okay, I agree with you. And you say, well, what do you think? And then you say, oh, I agree with the two former. You don't get to a diverse, inclusive environment. But if I instead say that, well, let's discuss this. In what sort of situation would this be the wrong decision? Can you elaborate? And then you get the diverse opinions and you can start including other people's opinions in the decisions.
I like that because oftentimes people just think from my point of view. And if you're in a room that's actually not even diverse, people only think about it from themselves, not if you put the question in like, how could this go wrong with other people or affecting other people? Then they put themselves in other people's shoes and you might get some interesting results from that.
One serious part is that we've become more polarized in every discussion. And instead of thinking you want to be right, you need to think that the decision needs to be right. We can all agree on, okay, it's important to get the decision right. Then let's explore all the opportunities to how to get that decision right. And that means that you need to invite people in, and that is inclusion in practice.
I'm curious because we also want to try to measure. I've had this in my own company that the company is doing so many different things at 45 operations and that we know that pockets of good things are happening locally as in local initiatives because they understand the needs of their local country and they're working on the S aspect. We personally found it very difficult to collect all of this information itself, trying to chase on emails and trying to say, what are you doing? Or trying to catch it when they did it. So it wasn't 5 months later you're catching up with it and they don't remember anymore. Do you have any good tips? I know a lot of companies struggle with this.
This is the struggle that we all have, getting the facts on the table and the data points that we need to get in there to make sure that CS is complied with. I don't know if I have any tips with it, but trying to inspire people to actually talk about it being a narrative. One of the things that we think is that as long as it's data, if it's facts, then it's good enough to actually be reported on. It's fair to say that if we want to remember it and see if we can bring forward, we need to have the narrative and the idea behind it and getting those stories distributed. And we don't do that nearly enough. We now spend a lot more time on trying to find where is the data for that, and like 1,100 data points, instead of actually looking at stories people tell. To be able to remember things, you need to have stories. It's easier to remember stories than it is to remember data and facts. I think this is very strange for an economist to say, but we're not going to get the results like we spend this much and then we get that. We're going to spend this much and get that. We're going to have to spend this and we hope that we're going to get this. And some point in the future, we're getting it, but we don't know whether or not it stems from here.
I think the more that you can track, at least in the beginning, then you can see maybe there's an outcome. But I like what you said, because I feel the industry is getting so much into reporting and they're spending a lot of the time and effort in finding the report rather than actually driving the initiatives that can move it forward. You've been working in this for a while. What do you think about the changes and maybe the future direction that ESG? Is this too much of a question?
No, it's a big question. I mean, you don't ask to press the guy. I'm part-time pessimist and then part-time optimistic. I see that we are one of the companies that are able to actually take down the climate emissions from our and all our scopes in line with the science-based targets. We're one of 9 companies on the Oslo Stock Exchange. There's a lot of companies not doing what is sufficiently to get it. So that scares me. It scares me that in Norway, there's 1 in 3 that don't believe that man made the climate crisis. It scares me that the value chain we're looking at is not nearly as developed as it should be to bring low carbon products to market within the time frame that we talked about. I've talked about this in different conferences. At the same time, I believe in human ingenuity and experimentation and finding the solution when it comes. I don't believe in magic, but I believe in the idea that if you put engineers and people that are interested in doing it with a problem, a serious problem, and trying to fix it, they're going to fix it. With regards to the S, I think we're slowly getting there. We need to stop quarreling about this issue and start looking at the solutions instead of pointing finger and saying that you're not doing enough or you're not doing enough. We need to just open up and getting that. For the G, I think everything is going to be all right.
Well, that's good to hear. I do think with the S, you have the Norwegian Transparency Act that brought a lot more attention to the S than ever before. You have the EU CSDDD. You could debate whether or not it's, high enough or not, but the fact that it went into legislation is a good thing. So you're starting to see a lot more attention than ever before. And I think that's a good thing. Companies are challenged in what does S actually mean. And I think a lot of people just think it's maybe 1 or 2 of the huge topic area that can fall within S. A lot of people just think it's human rights, but there's also diversity, equity, inclusion. Some people even think privacy, like your data could be part of that one. Yeah, health and safety.
GDPR, yeah, exactly.
It could be in governance. It's actually a lot of different topic areas. A lot of people I've seen Norwegian Transparency Act, they only focus on the supply chain. That's it. But the Transparency Act, there's more to that, your own workforce and your product. So it is a developing area that we see. To go back into your role, both because you have strategy and sustainability, I'm very curious because that's not often, right? Sometimes you have communications.
There's more and more of us.
And what are your thoughts on that? And what are the positive aspects of having it there?
Let me take you back to my first job. My first job was working with a gold mining company that had mines in Western Africa, one of the poorest countries in the world, where we actually extracted gold in a way where you use cyanide to extract the gold. Could be devastated getting the gold out. That's the first time I talked about the issue of sustainability. It dawned on me. This is 95, yeah?
So this is early. You're an early thinker in this, yes.
At that time, at least from the beginning of the 21st century and going forward the first 10 years, we talked about sustainability being like a license to operate and like a reputation issue. And I think now we're talking more about being a business issue. Like, how do we actually run our business in a way that doesn't hurt the planet or use the resources too fast? That's the reason I think it's important to have it with strategy, not with communication or reputation issues. I know there are a lot of people and a lot of companies now bringing it to the CFO line. I think that's done because of the reporting. I would highly recommend to also have strategy involved in this. That's the big material issues that we're talking about. They're part of the strategy. How do you actually run the business without spending too much CO2 or emitting or doing too much damage? It's just part of the strategy in the business development.
I absolutely agree. And I think that's the movement from a cost center. ESG or compliance oftentimes is seen as a cost center just because you have to report on it and you spend a lot of time on reporting. rather than a competitive advantage and how to actually drive your business forward in terms of customer, even RFPs you see in government sectors in Europe, recruiting the younger generation, Gen Z, and then also for investors. I think there's becoming more of a business imperative for it, but I think it's also harder to measure because recruiting Gen Z, that could be a lot of different reasons than just this, whereas like a cost center of this is how much money I spent on reporting. But I do think maybe that's my optimistic side of me that it is going to go into a competitive advantage, but it's more likely to do so if it's sitting within strategy than finance. Strategy automatically looks at the business opportunity. Finance is how do you cut costs.
But I think there is a financial aspect in strategy as well, because technically, as I mentioned earlier, businesses are trying to make as much profit as possible, arguably, right?
Business is trying to make as much value as possible. And in that run to actually maximize value of the operation you do, you can capture more value, which is the profitability part. I think we've misunderstood the idea of capitalism if you think that business is only here to actually maximize the profit to the shareholders. And if you go through the list of companies produced for a long time, on the top of the list, like on the Acquired podcast and everything, they are solely focused on how to actually bring more value to the customer because they understand that's the part of what we're trying to do. Going back to say that capitalism is part of the shareholder primacy discussion that we had in the 80s and early 90s, I think we're past that. It's not to say that profit isn't important. It's very important. It's a sign of you being a good corporation, there's a difference between maximizing profit and maximizing value to the sake of having more profit. This is the discussion that always tends to be polarized. If you talk to, let's say, Alex Edman's famous professor, you probably read him, right? In Grow the Pie, the discussion where it's more important to actually grow the pie than actually say how much of a pie is yours and how much of a pie is mine. Because the value we create is at some point going to be split between different parties. Some value is going to the customers, some value is going to the employees, some value is going to the suppliers, and then the last part is going to shareholders. But if you were to maximize for shareholders, you would say that, well, it doesn't matter how much value we actually produce for anything else. We want to maximize the shareholder value.
But I think that actually goes very well with what I was going to ask, because my question was how you are clearly building value by including sustainability in the strategy. But that might not necessarily be reflected in the profit immediately, right? How do you present that? Any tips around that?
That part is a good question, because if we were to have lunch hosts from Tenus, and that would cost us more money so that we will capture less profits because the costs are gone, that's the discussion. That's where you have to value how much impact does it have and what sort of value is that impact on a short term, like now, and how much value would it have on a long term going forward. If we are able to actually see those two perspectives, you're able to also see that if we create more value for society, it's going to be easier also to actually capture more value for our clients going forward. That's the cash flow idea that
I love that too, that thought about the value, but I think it is progressive though. I think a lot of companies are still focused on, unfortunately, the shareholder value. It's not a net zero game. Actually, if everybody grows it together and adds the value together, your chunk will be bigger, but it's just a different way of reframing it, which I really like. Also, that includes the whole ESG into the core strategy of the company. So it's not mutually exclusive, I guess. Also, that could be a tip for our listeners on how to frame sustainability or compliance into long-term business drivers.
That was my intention, because we're all passionate here about ESG. But if you are sitting in the sustainability position in a company and you have these ideas and you want, but you're constantly being rejected by management, and you guys are doing a lot on this front. So how those people can bring their ideas together in a way that makes the management or the board buy in because they see value in the long run rather than just maximizing short-term profit?
I think most management see value in the long run, and then talking about that, it's just sometimes everybody gets caught up in the moment and then see that, well, this is going to cost us more money. How can we actually make this happen without it costs us more money? Or do we have to drop this? And it's always a prioritization. It would be great if everyone could do like this. It's like, oh, okay, let's reduce the climate emission. That's going to happen. And then it's not going to cost us any money. Actually, it's going to make us more money. That's not a difficult question. That's a very easy issue to solve. The difficult part, where it gets interesting, where curiosity needs to be at the forefront and we need to focus, that's where we get that discussion or that dichotomy between creating more value on a sustainable level and then losing the profitability part of it, costing more.
Yeah, I sometimes get frustrated in this sector. It's like sustainability or compliance officers are expected to make change just based off of their monthly salary. You know, they have no budget, they don't have anything and no support. That has to be also the maturity of the organization. There will be some cost if you want to drive this value short term for the longer term. And I think it's something that needs to change within our industry, because that's where you see the struggles of these one-man shops that have no budget to actually try to change it in the role. Let's say that you're a new employee that has been tasked in sustainability to focus on the S. You have your E under control. The carbon reporting is there. Compliance officers managing the governance part. For the S social part, where should they start? What are the first 3 steps they should start taking towards the journey with S?
They first of all should start of thinking of self as agents of impact. How do I understand the impact that the company have, and what sort of impact can I do to make that happen? Being able to read the materiality analysis and see how do our clients see our social sustainability? What is our role? Where can I make a difference? That's the first part. If you analyze and understand that, you can start talking about where do I create more impact for ourselves and our company, and where is the small parts? There's nothing like 2 small parts. Everything matters. And then I think we need the organization on. The one thing is getting the management on, which is basically producing the material, laying it in front of a manager or a senior leadership team, and then talking about rational parts. The other part is getting the entire organization on this. And that's a storytelling issue. There's a couple of times I've been discussing social sustainability, and I feel like we're not talking about the real impact that we can make. We're talking about the small impacts, like making the office more inclusive, or we need to start thinking, how much can we do? How much can we manage to change?
Do you think that they should start with our longer term strategies? Like, we want to make this overall impact, but here we're going to start with these 2-3 initiatives.
Yeah, you need to start. What am I going to do on Monday? How can I actually make something happen on Monday? How can I make something happen on Wednesday? And then track that.
One of the good things, I've done this mistake in my career too, is often you start doing the small steps because that's the easiest thing, but you lose track of the greater vision that you're working on, and you're not able to anchor that greater vision with the organization or with the management team. So it's almost like, here's my greater vision, so people see what direction you want to go and where you want to dream and where you want to bring the company longer term. But here's my practical, tangible step of A, B, C, and D, where I'm not going to turn the ship away, but it's heading in this direction. And I often tell you missing. Sometimes it's like, here's my big strategy. I want to change the world. No execution. Sometimes a little bit too much execution, not bringing in that storytelling. So trying to find that right balance, I think, is really important, especially on the S, the storytelling, like you said, because it's all people, it's emotion. Why do we want to be an inclusive, values-driven company?
What do you two think is the most important kind of sustainability, social sustainability issues to solve?
For me, I think just being a minority female, diversity is something that's always close to my heart, but it really depends on each company, like in terms of the materiality sector, because if you're working in a very digital company, human rights or child labor isn't going to be as big of an issue. But if you're working in a mining company, one is life and death and health and safety, human rights, then so it really depends on what the issue is. But I do think as a whole is overlooked. There's so much attention on carbon reporting, environmental reporting. Governance has been around there for a really long time. And the S, it's emerging now, but it's more recent. There's not really a structure around it. And oftentimes it's overlooked and it's been grouped into charitable giving. So it's like, how much have you donated? And I've done that too. I've collected that. But I think that's just the beginning and people shouldn't stop there or think that that's it.
For me, I think in S, it's very hard to find out all these data points and quantify things. So it is values driven, how the organization is being run in terms of social aspects. As you said, depends from company to company. Some company might be more important. There's more initiative towards inclusion, some company more towards human rights. But in the end, it's really about being value driven, because that's going to really make an impact other than just doing it for the sake of reporting. That's my opinion, at least.
Yeah, but I mean, how much does it cost to be more inclusive? I just can't think of a single thing that's going to make our profits go lower.
I think there is a cost to it because it's a way of changing the way of working. Let's just think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. There will be a cost in terms of having to change the way that you do your regular job announcements and maybe talking to a specialist to make it more inclusion, spending a few more hours to get more female. There is a time and cost to changing the way your company already acts. A lot of companies, unfortunately, they don't want to spend. Everyone's so busy. Everyone's trying to do their own tasks. Why would they go out of their way to change it when it's been working most of the time for everything else? So there is a cost and a time to sustainability. Can it be more efficient? Absolutely. Sustainability and compliance can be way more efficient than it is now because it's very manual. But in doing something, there will be cost and time to it. The challenge right now in the sector is that all of those are just saying, oh, you're taking away from my profit. Rather than what you said, it's actually increasing the value of the company, which the profits will increase. And I love what you said about that, because that's another way of reframing the same thing that can actually show it's a bigger impact of your company. But unfortunately, where we are right now, everyone sees it as a cost center. And that's what we're trying to also change with our podcast around implementation, around data. And that is to change the topic around that.
There's a lot of sustainability issues that's going to cost us more. I totally agree, but I think we haven't exploited the number of ways we can do it to cost less. Some of the things that we do on climate is that we know that if we spend or use less cement or do it in a different way, or the walls are getting thinner because we can, we're going to use less material. And that's kind of an abundance of things that we can do to actually make that happen. And what we're focusing on is that it's going to cost more. We don't look at the opportunities to do this without it costing more. We're looking at all the hindrance that's going to stop us from doing it. And with social responsibility or the social sustainability part, the S in the ESG, I don't think that it's going to cost more to run companies where if people feel more included. I just don't.
I agree. I think you will get more output and more engagement. My cynical self is to make it actually inclusive, takes changing the way you work and think, and that sometimes takes time and money to do that.
Then we go to the rapid fire questions. I'll begin. One word to describe the future of ESG.
Promising.
What is the biggest misconception about ESG?
That it necessarily is going to cost more money.
Your go-to metric for ESG success.
I'd like to say impact.
Your biggest challenge in ESG implementation.
Getting people to understand the materiality.
Most underrated aspect of ESG.
The social sustainability or social part S.
ESG in one sentence.
Once we start talking about business that's more holistic than what it is today, we're going to take into account that ESG matters. Right now, we're just talking about profits and revenues. And then with now ESG, that's going to cost us. If we want to be here for a long time as a business, we need to think of what sort of footprint we have in the world.
Why is ESG implementation more important than ESG reporting?
It's more important because we want to see results.
That's a good answer. Thank you for your time. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah. I look forward to meeting again in the future, I hope.
Likewise.